Jewish Education in Media is pleased to present L'Chaim, a program that highlights the people, issues, and events of importance to the Jewish community. Now here is your host, Rabbi Mark Golub.
I'm Mark Golub. Welcome to a very, very special edition of L'Chaim. I've said this to you before, I am very lucky because one of the things I get to do, because I'm involved in Jewish television and have been doing L'Chaim for 30 plus years, I get a chance to meet with some of the most interesting, creative people on the world Jewish scene. And I have three people sitting with me today, all of whom have done enormous good for the Jewish people and really for culture as a whole. And so it is with extraordinary pleasure that I want to introduce you to the people who have been kind enough to join me and in essence to join you as well. I want to begin by introducing you to a gentleman who has created a foundation in England that has been at the forefront of Jewish culture. He has a very unique view of what Jewish life is, and I've been wanting to meet with him for a long, long time, and to have him at this table is really an enormous kick for me. I want to introduce you to Felix Posen. Felix is the founder of the Posen Foundation, which is committed to making cultural Jewish education available to the next generation and then some. As part of these efforts, Felix has initiated a unique program in Israel to train the next generation of teachers in the Israeli state school system. And the Posen Foundation also promotes the study and research of anti-Semitism, doing that at the Hebrew University. Felix Posen has been awarded honorary doctorates from both Hebrew University and from Tel Aviv University in recognition of this work. And much of that work surrounds his efforts in creating wonderful books, textbooks, reference books that help chronicle and explain the contribution of Jewish culture and how that contribution has affected really all of civilization. And Felix has come to New York now to celebrate the publication of the first of 10 volumes. I have the first volume here. And I was kidding with my guests, you almost need a truck to bring it from one place to another. And it's worth every effort. This is an extraordinary compendium. It is an anthology of sorts. It is called Jewish Culture and Civilization. This is volume 10 of 10 volumes, although it's the first of the 10 volumes that has been produced. Jewish Culture and Civilization, part of the Posen Library. And volume 10 covers the period of 1973 to 2005, which in essence brings us very much up to the present time. And it is a brand new and enormously significant contribution to Jewish knowledge, Jewish information, and I believe it goes beyond the Jewish people. It really is something that will be a reference book. And again, I don't want to get ahead of myself. It'll be a reference book in many different contexts. Felix, congratulations for just creating this, and thank you so much for just giving me some time again. I wanted to sit with you for so long. It is lovely to get to meet you in person. Thank you very, very much.
Oh, thank you for inviting me. I wanted to meet you also. We've talked for a while and corresponded, but we never met, so this is the first one.
Yes, thank you very, very much. I also want to introduce you to two other wonderful people who are here. One I'm getting to know for the first time, James E. Young. James is the overall editor of the entire 10 volumes. He is editor-in-chief of the 10-volume set, Jewish Culture and Civilization. He is Distinguished University Professor of English and Judaic Studies at the University of Massachusetts Amherst, and he's the author of 4 books dealing with the Holocaust, including The Texture of Memory, which won a National Jewish Book Award. James also served on the design committees that chose the National 9/11 Memorial in New York City and Germany's National Memorial to the Murdered Jews of Europe in Berlin. And it's a pleasure to meet you. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having me, Mark. Look
And
forward to this.
I want to talk more about how you do all of these various things. And then someone who I have watched and admired for a long time, and she is the editor of specifically Volume 10, one of the co-editors with Nurith Gertz. And I meant to ask you before we went on camera, this is Deborah Moore.
Yes.
You've seen her before on Shalom TV.
Yes, I have.
You've seen her as part of the American Jewish Historical Society convention that we covered in New York. But you are one of the co-editors of Volume 10, and you are the Frederick G.L. Is it Heatwell Professor? Heatwell Professor of History at the University of Michigan, where Deborah also is the director of the Jean and Samuel Frankel Center for Judaic Studies. So both of these distinguished academicians are involved in history and Jewish studies, and both are involved in creating an extraordinary work, Jewish Culture and Civilization. Thank you also for joining us. Felix, I want to ask you a couple questions first, and then I want to talk about the book and the series. So you have the Posen Foundation.
Yes.
I will tell you how it is popularly understood. I want you to tell me if we get it right.
Okay, I'm all ears.
Your commitment is more to a cultural, secular Jewish approach than to a religious Jewish approach. Do you feel that is fair?
Yes, that's fair. That's correct.
Okay.
Yes.
May I ask, where were you born?
I was born in Berlin.
You were born in Berlin. And ultimately, you now live in England.
I now live in England, yes.
Okay. And your family's journey itself, when you were born in Berlin, was your family involved in Jewish life?
Oh, very much so. I was born into a typical Orthodox Jewish family. My father came from Frankfurt, my mother from Hamburg. So we had all parts of German religious, cultural life in our home.
So you grew up in what was then a German Orthodox Jewish home.
Yes.
Did you love it?
Oh, yes. I was very comfortable and happy with it, of course.
And, again, I don't want to draw pictures of your own life. I imagine immediately there was a special experience in your home on Shabbat, Friday night.
Of course.
And often you would go with your father to synagogue.
Each and every Friday night and each and every Shabbat and Yom Tov.
Okay. Was there the equivalent of the American Talmud Torah where you were taught as a young person all about Hebrew and Jewish life and Jewish customs, etc.?
Yes, I would say so.
At that time, were your parents what you would call religious Jews?
Yes.
At what point in your own development do you move in a different direction?
I moved in a different direction after I graduated university, which was in 1948 at the end of World War II. And as
I'm sorry, and where was that?
in New York City.
Okay.
And as some of our very few remaining relatives came back, particularly a first cousin who survived both Auschwitz and the Death March, it made me change.
Talk more moment about it. Are you talking about it changed your faith?
Yes, a change of faith. It was very difficult for me to continue to believe that there was a God who looked over us and allowed this to happen to us, particularly in a sense also to children who are innocent of anything in any way one consider in a religious life. It was just inexplicable. Mm-hmm. It was a terrible time for me.
Mm-hmm. Your family escaped Germany.
My own immediate family escaped, yes, we were very lucky.
Roughly when?
We left right after Kristallnacht, 1938. The children left in 38. My parents followed in 39. We were able to go into England because we had a quota to go to the United States, and we left for the United States in March 1940, just before the U-boat war.
Amazing.
So we were amazingly lucky We were on a boat that was subsequently sunk.
Amazing. Felix, that's
And
quite a
we were
story.
just very, very fortunate.
You know, there were many German Jews, German Jewish families that did not leave,
Yes.
even after Kristallnacht.
Oh, yes.
I don't blame them, but I want to understand them. When you look back, can you explain why your family, your parents, sent the children first and then followed, as opposed to other Jewish German families that did not leave?
Yes, I can tell you exactly. In my particular family, immediate family, my father, who was a World War I veteran with an Iron Cross, second or third order, whatever it is, said, nothing's going to happen to me, I'm a veteran. My mother, in 1936, when she heard the Nuremberg laws, said this isn't going to last, and asked for a quota from her first cousin in America. That's what saved our life.
So she had some real, she saw into the future.
Yeah, she smelled a rat.
She smelled the rats. And what you're saying is, unfortunately, there were many Jewish families that did not have the same.
Far too many. Terrible. What a tragedy.
Okay. And after the Holocaust, your own faith changed in God. Did your commitment to the Jewish people change?
No, never. I never ever said that I'm not Jewish or proud to be Jewish, whatever it is. I just privately, for myself, no longer was Shomer Mitzvot. I continued life as before. When I was home, I did everything I was supposed to do. When I went with my father to shul, I did everything I was supposed to do.
That's lovely.
Yeah, and I kept that way all the time.
Do you feel there's anything of a second-class nature of a Jew who has a very strong Jewish identity, but is not Shomer Mitzvot?
But it's not.
Shomer Mitzvot. Is there anything less of a Jew who is not involved in the observance of the mitzvah?
From my point of view, essentially no, but there's a caveat. The problem is that those who leave Orthodoxy or religious Judaism stop learning.
Yes.
And their children don't learn. And I think that has created a terrible problem and split for the whole Jewish nation worldwide. And it's true in every country, it's the same.
You know, what we try to do here is say that there is no one authentic expression of how to be a Jew. But it always seems to me that what you want from a Jewish family and from an individual Jew is a commitment to Jewish identity, Jewish peoplehood, and an identification with the Jewish past and future. And if somebody has that, my own sense is everybody finds their own spiritual way and their own way to express themselves in the Jewish community. I want them to be involved in Jewish life, in Jewish community, but I believe there should be an embrace of the secular Jew as well as the observant Jew. Are you comfortable with my articulation of it that way?
Yes.
You're listening to Felix describe himself.
Yes.
Boy, isn't it fascinating?
Yes.
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 So,
I didn't know that.
James, any comment as you listen to how Felix describes what he's done, his own journey, and where he is, and how he looks at Jewish life today?
Well, his journey makes perfect sense, to those of us who studied the wartime and the aftermath in this country. And what I love both about Felix as a person and his outlook is his amazing generosity of spirit. When he first approached me about serving as editor-in-chief of the Posen Library, I think within the first 2 minutes, he was describing a compilation of all of Jewish culture, including religious and secular texts. This was never intended to be, an anthology of secular Jewish culture only.
Yes, and I just want to make sure our audience understands. In this book, it's set up by categories. One of the categories is not only spiritual and religious, spiritual and cultural, I think is the way you said, but it's also liturgical. And again, this is a form of anthology. What you've tried to do here is identify for the reader not every single person who has contributed to Jewish life between the years 1973 and 2005, but boy, you come very close.
Well, we'd still be working on it if that was
That's correct. It would,
that was the
it would
job.
never. I would need 2 trucks to bring it around.
Right.
But what you do have here is an enormous sampling of the writings, the thoughts, the muses of an extraordinary breadth of people that lived in this 35-year, 40-year period. And what was so interesting to me, Felix, was I did not know when I opened the book, would there be a section that dealt with spirituality and liturgy? You have a liturgical section here, a gorgeous compilation that samples and sort of reveals the way in which there has been an evolution of Jewish liturgy among our people in this period of time. And so your point is that Felix did not say to you, I only want you to do a secular book.
No, he came from a religious home and so knew exactly what it was he was going to leave behind personally, but he brought, I think, the spiritual sense with him. Now he has, a profoundly spiritual attachment to the culture and productions of Jews, throughout the ages. And I think he wanted to share that connection.
I agree.
He felt so deeply
Yes,
with all of Jewish culture.
Beautifully said. Deborah, I want you also to react to the same thing. As you hear Felix describe a vision, what's your sense? Is it both as an historian and as a Jew yourself?
Okay, so I didn't know your story at all, except that I knew that it went from someplace in Germany to New York, then to England. And I have to comment, as you would expect me to comment, on your mother's foresight. Because indeed, in general, we know that women, in some ways, understood the dangers that their children faced, sometimes better than men. And
Yes.
that also fits with some of what the scholarship has shown. And what you said about the importance of continuing to learn, I found that piece very moving, because you're right. Too often what happens is Jews move away from something, but they don't move toward. And they think that by moving away, they're moving into something that isn't Jewish, and they don't recognize the ways in which they're tracing a path that many other Jews have traced, and that there is much that's Jewish that's not necessarily anchored firmly to religious worldview, but exists as well in a larger cultural worldview. It's in politics, it's in intellectual life, it's in literatures, all of those
That's
things. And one needs to keep learning.
So as you hear this comment, any thought come to you?
Sure. The immense contribution of the tiny, tiny Jewish people towards world culture is an untold story. It's an amazing story. And you do not learn that in a Talmud Torah school. Talmud Torah school, rightly or not, but it sticks to what it knows and what it feels it should teach, i.e. the Tanakh, the Talmud, Midrash, and so forth and so on. Nothing wrong with that at all. But if you also want to learn other aspects of the immense contribution of the Jewish people to world culture, you need something else. And I learned only later on in life what I wasn't taught in the Talmud Torah school. We were never able to even use the name Spinoza, Mendelssohn, Achata. That's all treif. It was like eating pork, right?
Yes.
You can't,
Yes.
You weren't allowed to use those terms. And I was perfectly happy with it until I became middle-aged and started thinking a bit more about these things. And that's how this whole thing evolved.
You are not anti people who do somehow find their own expression in a more observant or orthodox form of Judaism.
I am not anti anything that's human. And that includes all forms of Judaism, from the Haredi on towards Reconstruction. And all these things, you know, have changed in my lifetime.
Yes.
When I was born, there was no rabbi who was a woman.
Me too.
Yeah, you too. So you know. So you know.
Sally Presand is mentioned in this book because you're doing from 1973 to 2005. Now, she was actually ordained in 1972 as alongside me.
Yeah.
I was in the class with
Connection.
Sally Presand when she was ordained, and I've had her on, and she's now retired, but it was an extraordinary event.
Yeah.
When I grew up, there was no female voice from the Bnai. There was no rabbi, there was no chazan, there was no cantor. And now, you know, if you look at the Reform Rabbinical School, HUCJIR, there are more female rabbinic students than male. But in your life, there has been a sea change of Jewish life. Isn't that true?
Unbelievable. The first woman who was ordained as a rabbi by Leo Beck in Berlin, where I was born. Yes? The whole idea was anathema to the Jewish community. Yes? It was as treif as you could get.
Yes.
And today, as you say, the majority of seminarians, certainly in the Reform movement, but I think also in the conservative movement, are in fact women. That is an unbelievable sea change.
Yes.
Anyone, if you would have predicted that when I was born, they would have put you in an insane asylum.
And doesn't that have implications for the Jewish future? I wonder if there are other things which, boy, another example, and this is not, I don't believe this is covered in the up to 2005, but the other sea change has been the way the Jewish world has embraced the homosexual Jew. And where gay marriage now, even for Jews, I say even for Jews, in some way they have been at the forefront, but gay marriage is something even that has a different kind of recognition that it would have even 10 years ago.
Sure.
And the sea changes don't stop, yes?
The very idea of an anthology like this was premised on that sea change. We envisioned Jewish life and populations in its entirety. And you know, Felix is an absolute realist. Whether he wants it or not, he just says it's real, it's there. I embrace it as I embrace life, and we're going to show all of it. And we do. I mean, Deborah happens to be, you know, maybe the world's greatest expert at this point, I think, on Jewish women's history.
Correct.
She and Paula Hyman, you know, were really our pioneers in this.
And at some point, it wasn't easy for you.
No, that's true. And one of the things I'm very proud about, if one can take pride in a piece of work like this, is the fact that women's voices are very much present in this anthology.
Yes, absolutely.
Yes. And that is, I think, really a critical difference from how people had thought about who had the right to speak as a Jew in the past, because it was mostly men who were considered the ones who had the right to speak as Jews. And
at any point in your own life, was the idea of what a woman could be in Jewish life, whether it was in the synagogue or in academic life, did it ever pose a stumbling block for you?
Well, okay, so I grew up in New York in a Reconstructionist congregation.
Were you at the SAJ?
Yes.
No kidding.
Yes, and so I had.
But just so we know, I became bar mitzvah at the SAJ.
Okay, and I became bat mitzvah at the SAJ.
Mazal tov.
And see, so to become bat mitzvah as a kid, it was like normal. I didn't realize how unusual it was.
And you realize, Bobby, the first bat mitzvah ever was at the SAJ.
That's right. That's right.
You know that too?
Yes, 1923 or something.
It was who?
It was Rabbi
Mordechai Kaplan's daughter.
Judith.
Isn't it lucky he had girls?
Yeah, 4 of them. That's
for all of
right.
us. Lucky for all of
That's
us.
how life works.
You're
You had an
absolutely right.
individual who was innovative and was not afraid. He had daughters, and gosh darn it, his daughters were going to have what his boys would have had.
That's right.
And
right.
thank heavens, you know.
Yeah.
But I interrupted you.
Okay, so I said it was normalized, right? Because that was my world. But then when I went outside that world, when I went to a Jewish camp, I recall wanting, after my bat mitzvah, I wanted an aliyah to read. And it caused this whole uproar in the camp. And the counselor who was running services decided, okay, that since I had this, you know, and I knew how to do it, etc., he would call me up. So he calls me up, and the boys all walked out.
Oh. Wow.
So
Which camp was this?
This was, it doesn't exist anymore, Camp Jocosi.
Okay.
It was in the
right.
mountains. Anyhow, so it was incidents like that sort of make you realize, oh, you know, the whole world isn't accepting you. And then, of course, you get more and more, as we call them, consciousness-raising events. And certainly by the time I was in graduate school, it was very clear that there were real barriers to me as a woman and as a Jewish woman, and one had to articulate and push for change.
I'll make one more comment, then I want to talk about the book. Very often people say to me, so what is Shalom TV? And they imagine it is a Jewish religious channel. And I've gone out of my way to say we are not a religious channel. I have nothing against, boy, I embrace Judaism. I love the Jewish tradition. But I believe most people don't have a clue what the Jewish tradition means when it talks about God. Not a clue. And that the supernaturalism and the kind of low cultural tradition, which unfortunately has become, in my mind, more and more dominant in areas of Jewish life today, is something that I think is an unfortunate development. And what we are trying to do here is show, without criticizing anybody, I don't care, anybody has a right to be a Jew any way they want. But if they want to find out what the Jewish tradition really has to say about our relationship to the divine in this world, and how there are no supernatural miracles according to the Jewish tradition. And it's not about a deus ex machina in the Jewish tradition, but that somehow the Jew tries to be as lovely and as gentle and as compassionate and healing as the Jew can possibly be, as open to anyone, including the non-Jew. There's no distinction made in the Jewish tradition. There's only one thing we require. Don't try to hurt us. Good. Don't try to kill us. If you embrace us, we treat you as well as any Jew should ever be treated. There is no distinction made. And what I want to teach on Shalom TV is a different kind of Jewish mentality, which I believe is the most authentic of all. And that is one of the reasons why I am thrilled that I get a chance to sit with you, because in my mind, that's what you've been trying to do with the Posen Foundation. And I just wanted to say that publicly to you, how much I admire the work you've done in that regard. And again,
I try to do it even wider than that.
In what way?
Not only to say we will embrace people who think nicely of us, but I would say they should be nice to everybody who is a human being. Yes, be it Jewish or Christian or Muslim or Hindu, whatever it is.
I said the same thing. The only thing I do say is the following. If they try to kill me, I have a responsibility, a Jewish responsibility, to defend myself.
Well, everybody has a responsibility to defend themselves.
Yes, although there are some cultures that argue differently, and some people today, and this is a far field, I don't want to go here, but there are some people today who do not want to give Israel the right to defend itself. But we're not there. Now I want to talk about the book. And I'm going to ask all three of you. In some sense, I believe one of the two of you should answer first, but I'm happy to have Felix answer as well. Did you write the introduction?
Yeah, together with Nurit.
Okay.
Yes.
So you raised what was to me the most fascinating question of all. What is Jewish culture? Right. And you're honest enough to begin with that question. I was very impressed. I'm saying to myself, what is meant by Jewish culture? And lo and behold, you address it. So the question is, how do you define Jewish culture? Is it anything a Jew does of a cultural nature? In other words, is Jewish culture defined by what a Jew does, or must there be some kind of Jewish content to that cultural act? And once I hear your answer, I will give you specifics of the book that I want you to explain to me. Okay. But can you tell me, how do you define Jewish culture for our audience? Okay. And for your audience?
Right. So first, you have to remember that we say we do not take an essentialist definition. In
What
other
does
words,
that mean?
that means there's no pintaliyid, there's no Jewish core, there's no thing that you can say in terms of content that it has to have this and that makes it Jewish.
Okay.
Okay? So now we're talking a different kind of pluralism than we just mentioned, because Jews produce Jewish culture. On rare occasions, non-Jews do as well, but they can only produce it, either Jews or non-Jews, by having Jews also be involved in the creation of it. You might think in American terms, Dewey had this theory when he talked about a work of art, that it actually does work, right? Culture does work, and it works together with you as a reader, with audience, with, if it's a performance, with people who share in it, who repeat it and retell it, who republish it. It has to have a number of characteristics for it to make its way into Jewish culture.
So give me some of the characteristics.
So I'll give, language is relevant, things that are—
I'm sorry, what do you mean?
Well, things that are written in Hebrew or in Yiddish, which are specifically Jewish languages, as it were, have a step closer to being considered Jewish because of the language that it's written in, and who therefore will read it.
Are you saying that anything written in Hebrew or Yiddish is Jewish culture?
Potentially, yeah. I mean, lots of stuff gets written, and then, one has to think of who's reading it, right? So audience is relevant.
Okay, so
and
language
the context in which it's read is also relevant. So I give an example of poetry. There's a lot of wonderful poetry that's produced by Jews. Some of that poetry has actually been selected by other Jews to put into a prayer book. When a poem migrates from being published in a small journal or even in a chapbook or something into a siddur, then it has a different valence, because now it's going to be read by people as expressive of a collective and not just a personal voice.
And if an Indian wrote a gorgeous piece of poetry
Yes.
that was included in a prayer book,
Yes,
would you consider that to be Jewish culture?
yes. And I can give you an example, because
Interesting.
Kaplan, since we were talking about Kaplan included a rewriting, actually. He rewrote a section of Rabindranath Tagore in the 1945 Sabbath prayer book.
That's correct.
And it's a very beautiful poem, and for those years, I don't think they kept it in the more recent one, but certainly for those years, it was functioning as part of Jewish
That's
culture.
very, but wait, you understand there's no right or wrong here. There is a degree of subjectivity.
Absolutely.
I would say that the embrace of the Jewish people is such that we appreciate that there are expressions of spirituality which have been expressed in different cultures, which we're comfortable with and even can express a certain vision. And therefore, if I were to take something written by an Indian poet and put it into a prayer book, I would put it in there as an expression of how Indian culture, in some way speaks to me as well, but I would never call it Jewish culture.
But once read Jewishly, how can you avoid?
So one of the things that Jews have done, I think, so successfully over many, many years is they have known how to assimilate many different kinds of cultures. They've been in contact with lots of different people, and to make that Jewish. And I'll give you an example with food, right? Because we all eat and we know about food. So we know that there really isn't any Jewish food.
You're
there
correct.
are laws of kashrut that have to be followed, but there's no Jewish
correct.
food. So what happens with food is Jews are in Italy or they're in Poland, and they pick up the culture and they cook just like their neighbors do, only with, they don't use the same oils because it has to be kosher. And then they migrate and they come to the United States, and all of a sudden this food, which was perfectly naturalized, as it were, in its other environment, gets labeled Jewish food because it has it has been carried with Jews.
That's a brilliant analogy. I don't know if I'm comfortable with
You're not
extending
comfortable with that one, too.
but I like that specific because it's true. What we think is Jewish, but Jews can also are much too limited. If you grow up in an Eastern European Jewish home, you think that's Jewish food. And you don't know there's a whole Sephardic diet, which for a Sephardic Jew is also Jewish food. Right. But when you hear this interchange, would you describe Jewish culture the same way Deborah does?
Oh yeah, I mean, I think from the very beginning in our early conversations, we had gigantic roundtables with Jonathan Sarna and Deborah and Paul.
Were you part of that?
Yes,
Yeah, Felix
you should have invited.
We actually we have the transcripts, and the transcripts one day.
Oh, that's
we
wonderful.
will. I think we should publish.
I want to film it for show.
But around this table, including religious, non-religious, completely political, non-political, all shapes and sizes.
Yes. If it's said by a Jew, does that make it Jewish culture? If it's written by a Jew.
Well, there was a big debate about the
we had these great examples. Yudo Bauer.
The Sermon of the Mount,
written
by a Jew, maybe written by a Jew. We're not sure exactly.
Well,
but to the extent to which
I think it's in the.
It's a question.
Right. To the extent to which it is historicity, it's written by a Jew.
Right.
Okay.
By
Jewish culture.
By the time it got
is
redacted.
it Jewish culture?
It's part of it.
He wrote it in the book. Oh, not period. Wrong period.
Stay tuned. But Yudo Bauer's point was brilliant.
Yeah.
So it was written by a Jew, spoken by a Jew to Jews originally. Yeah. Eventually, it was redacted and Christianized.
Right.
But in its context, in its actual historical context, it was a piece of Jewish lore.
Yeah. So, look, you're the editor-in-chief. You're going to put it into volume 1?
Well, the great thing is, Felix took a gigantic leap of faith when he asked me to be editor-in-chief.
Because? Because
he was going to have to take several other leaps of faith every time I asked somebody like Deborah to edit volume 10, and going all the way back to the beginning, we have Jeff Tigay, a wonderful biblical scholar, editing volume 1. My sense is he'll probably include it, just because he's got that same gigantic view. He's also religious, but he understands all of this.
Oh, it is.
He understands the conversation itself is what makes it Jewish.
It will be courageous of you to include it in a book of Jewish culture, but I understand why you would.
Yeah.
It seems to me that your two editors here, your editor-in-chief and your editor of volume 10 of Jewish Culture and Civilization as part of the Posen Library, both of them seem to be saying Jewish culture is defined in part by anything a Jew does. Do you agree?
We might not say it exactly that way. In other words, does a Jewish carpenter, does everything he builds, is it Jewish?
Yes. Is it?
No.
Is a Jewish writer, anything he writes Jewish?
No.
Is a Jewish cartoonist, anything he cartoons Jewish?
No.
Not anything or everything.
You an example
okay,
it's done by a Jew, but it doesn't necessarily be Jewish.
Okay, then I'm going to ask you, and again, I want to set this in context. This is an extraordinary work. By the way, for any, look, I would love this to see. I would love to see this become, obviously, a staple in every public library, every Jewish library, and I believe in many people's homes. I think Jews should have this in its home. And again, when you get this book, what you have is, if there is a name that has done anything of note between the years 1973 and 2005, Deborah and James have done an extraordinary job of including them in this anthology, and for every one of them, there is at least one excerpt of something they have done. If they're a writer, there's something they've written. If they've done some other kind of, if they're a poet, there's something they've done. If there's liturgy, it's something they've done. And the categories that are in this book include literature, drama, visual culture, intellectual culture, spiritual and religious culture, and liturgical culture. So every name of Jewish note that you can think of, they're in this book. I could not, but the only name that wasn't there was mine. And I said to myself, this must be the bane of your work.
Yes.
That if you leave somebody out, they'll say, how did you leave me out?
The
But-
TV
but-
producer know this.
Yeah, exactly.
And I said to myself, if everybody were here, the book would go on forever. But you do get that. From
I got
people
left
that-
out myself.
Did you?
Yeah, an early draft had one
Yes,
of my
you're
pieces
right,
in there.
you're right.
But
Deborah's in there.
yeah,
Her
I did.
wonderful
She
piece
should
on the
be.
Book of Ruth is in there. But are there people who complain, how come I'm not in
Yeah.
the book?
Of course.
Yes.
It
Well,
has to be.
get over it. Anyway, every single person of note who does something that you could think of is in here. Then people you wouldn't think of are in here. But now I'm going to get, and I think it's an extraordinary work. I would love you to pick it up and perhaps even own it. Having said that, my job is to ask you the questions.
Okay. I was
I'm
going
going
to
to give you.
an
I'm going to give
example.
you an example of something
Okay.
that I said to myself. I don't get it. I just don't get
Okay.
it. I had the great privilege in my life of knowing Al Hirschfeld, a fabulous cartoonist
Yeah.
who did a lot of theatrical cartoons. You put him in the book, and you use a cartoon of Bette Midler
Yeah.
to exemplify Al Hirschfeld's work. Al's, I do not consider that to be Jewish culture. Tell me why Hirschfeld and that cartoon made it into a book about Jewish culture and civilization.
Okay. So one of the things you're having difficulty with is popular culture. And popular culture really proliferates in this time period, especially among American Jews, because the United States is a big producer of popular culture, and Jews are creators and producers of much of American popular culture. And so Hirschfeld fits comfortably, I think you would say, within the realm of popular culture, right? A cartoonist, he does weekly,
He's definitely in American
popular culture.
How does he
Okay.
make it into Jewish culture?
Okay, so if you expand Jewish culture to include popular culture today, you have to then think about where do Jews make an impact in popular culture. Among the places where they make an impact are in comics and drawings, and nowadays some of them we call graphic novels. But certainly that mixture of word and image is a place where Jews have had an impact. I think that recognizing Hirschfeld as part of Jewish American Jewish popular culture is a way of saying that it isn't only about text, it's also about lines and drawings, and it's not just about what we would call elite culture, but it's also about the mass. And that Bette Midler here is this, wonderful, funny, and influential Jewish actress, which was why we chose that particular one. So he's commenting as a Jewish artist on a Jewish actress in the ways in which he chooses to draw her. Note that he does not draw her using any stereotypical anti-Semitic materials. And that too is important, to get visual representations of Jews done by Jews that is very different from how non-Jews often drew Jews. I mean, you can go back to seeing pictures of Sarah Bernhardt and others with highly stereotyped portraits. And these are not. And these are things that as a Jew you can say, yeah, fine, I see her. So.
But I'm assuming I do not offend you by asking you these
No,
questions.
not at all.
This is an
I mean, we discussed all of these
This is an
things.
intellectual exercise for
Yeah.
me. Al Hirschfeld, number one, did not do this as a Jew. And
Wait. So you're going to divide him,
No,
his Jewish side from his American side?
if it seems to me that I said to you,
Yeah.
if your criteria is whatever is done by a Jew belongs in a book of Jewish culture, I have no argument. I think you may be wrong, but I understand. But you said that I was going too far to say that. If you're saying to me, it's not simply a Jew does it, therefore it's Jewish culture, there has to be something about this act which either represents a Jewish expression of the artist himself. That's not who Al Hirschfeld was. He did not see himself as a Jew doing this as Jewish culture. He saw this as a cartoonist. If you had Yaakov Kirshen in this book, who does Dry Bones, I don't think Yaakov Kirshen is in here, am I right? Okay, Yaakov Kirshen is a cartoonist.
Right, an Israeli
Everything about what he does is an attempt to use the art form of cartoon to express something about Jewish life, and it comes out of his Jewish soul. That's not Abe Hirschfeld.
Right.
It's not Danny Kaye. Danny Kaye was in some way much more a Jewish artist than Abe Hirschfeld. And I don't understand if that's your, unless you say to me, Mark, Abe Hirschfeld was a Jew. Ipso facto, his cartoons are part of Jewish culture. If that's your argument, although I think you're wrong, I have no response. But if you say to me, it isn't that, I want to know what about Abe Hirschfeld, and this is not picking on him, I liked him very much, and he was an extraordinary cartoonist. But the fact that he was a Jew, in my mind, doesn't mean he was doing Jewish culture.
Okay,
and
so
I understand that this is a very subjective discussion.
Try to answer this. So I had wanted to give you another example before we got to this one, but this one will work as well.
Okay.
You'll notice in that opening paragraph, we also say that sometimes artists or writers are known basically because they are writing for non-Jewish audiences. Their Jewish identity is largely irrelevant to what it is that they are producing, which is basically what you're saying about Hirschfeld. You're not saying he's not a Jew. You're saying that his
That's
Jewish
correct.
identity is irrelevant to what he's producing.
And to his work.
Okay, and to his work. And then we say, but every so often, there's something, sometimes, that one of these people will do that is an expression of his or her Jewish identity in a way that is received. It generates discussion because it's said by somebody who doesn't normally comment on Jews, or because it actually is about Jews. I mean, you could have picked another cartoonist. There's a cartoon, the Levine, who used to draw cartoons for
You
didn't know him, for the New York Review of Books, right? And we have one of his cartoons as well. There's a point where something happens that they do that makes sense. Now, from our point of view, Hirschfeld on Bette Midler was worth including as a Jewish artist on another Jewish artist, a Jewish man on a Jewish woman. Bette Midler is very much out as a Jew. Her humor is very Jewish. So how is he responding? How does he picture her? And we felt that interaction, at that point, his Jewishness was relevant to how he was seeing it. Now, I don't know. I didn't interview him. But I'm assuming that in drawing her, he was responding not just as a cartoonist, but also as a Jewish man, as a Jewish artist, to her as a Jewish woman and as a Jewish artist.
That's as good an answer as you'll ever get
and
on any of these questions.
Yeah. No, because that's probably the most difficult call, but it's also important to note that she didn't include the other cartoons without that content.
People who read this book are not only going to be looking at what's there, but you're going to make them think. And they're immediately going to go to why, the very question that somebody asks you, why did you leave so-and-so out?
Right.
What a great contribution this
It's
book
already
makes.
been asked.
Yes.
But isn't there, what's
That's
the saying, there's many holes in Torah as there are readers? To come to it. There are many holes in Jewish culture as there are readers to come fill them in now.
Right. Okay. I want to ask you another question. You pick 1973 as your starting point. Again, it's purely, I believe you would agree it's subjective.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, and one of the things you say explicitly is it's not simply the Yom Kippur War, because any Jew who looks at this book, he sees 1973, right away he or she is going to say, they started from the Yom Kippur War.
Right.
And I say to myself, what an interesting choice of years. How did this happen? It's not the choice I would have made. So I want to know from any or all three of you, explain to our audience, why 1973 and not 67, for
You
example.
can ask that about any of the 10 volumes.
That's correct, but there's a reason, isn't there?
Sure, there's a reason.
What's the so?
One of our jobs is one of my earliest jobs was actually to break this anthology into volumes, and I went back and forth between 67 and 73. And I think maybe when we approached Deborah first, we had both those dates on the books.
I was anti-67.
Yeah, 67. Well, 67 is such a watershed.
Isn't it?
Complete watershed.
Okay.
And so it could have gone either way, but actually in some ways, 73 was the cap on 67. I think 67 kept in play all kinds of, especially Holocaust era and post-Holocaust era material. 67, the Seventh Day, many people seeing, it was Palestinian refugees for the first time as Jews, through this funny Holocaust lens. So it was all this culture produced just after the 67 war, which in a funny way was closer to what happened before and Israel's earlier wars than 73, which created a whole political caesura in some ways in Israel. Everything in Israel kind of changed in 73.
Also in 67.
Yeah, also in 67.
You're right, the Jewish world changed in 67.
Something changed. And I think that change lasted between 67 and 73 in some ways. And so I wanted, my thinking was then, and I think, I'm not sure Deborah and I even got this far in voicing it, but it just seemed more proper that what happened between 67 and 73 not get left out of the volume before.
Oh, in other words, you want the next volume to go through.
The volume 9's got to go up to 73. Yeah,
up to 73.
72, 73.
I see. And
he's right about that, because those 68, 9, etc. Are very much connected to World War II. And
yes, I understand. Yeah. You are already thinking about what's the next volume going to be. Would one of you speak for one moment about what is now a companion at the moment to Jewish Culture and Civilization, which is a book, unbelievable, done by Amos Oz and his daughter, Fania Oz Ellsberger, that you entitled Jews and Words. Felix, what's the idea here?
The idea was to give an example of what you can do if you are a very literate cultural Jew, religious or not, and how can that express itself in easily readable literature. That was essentially the idea, because an encyclopedia like that is a very dry book, a series of books. You can't just read it. You refer to it as a reference work.
As a resource.
As a resource, and that's what it should be. That's what people need. But this sort of ties together the whole series in the most charming and learned and interesting and funny way.
Whose idea was it?
Mine.
How do you think of this?
Well, I knew when this comes out, like any encyclopedic work, it's essentially a bore. You can't read it. It's a reference book.
Felix, it's not true.
Felix,
this book is as lively as everything that's in there.
Maybe our intro might seem boring.
I did not find it boring at all, by the way, as you can tell.
You. Yes.
And I know what you mean. You are overstating it.
Yes.
It is not a bore.
No.
Okay. And not only that, if people anybody who opens it up is going to have a reason.
Yeah.
And they will go to a section of it that is interest to them.
Of course.
Once you get to the section you're interested in, it's not a bore at all.
No.
And what is also lovely,
I think you can open it anywhere.
What is lovely is you read, and here's Wiesel, and here's Alan, here's Louise Glick, and here's Nathan Zach, and people I don't know, and here's a cartoon, and here's Barney Simon, and here's Arthur Miller, and here's David Mamet, and here's Potok, and here is David Wolpe and Harold Schulweis, so that people who open this, if they're there for a reason, no one was going to read this cover to cover.
No, you
but they
can't.
will go sections,
It's a
and
reference
once they
book.
know of it, it will be in their home, and there will be a moment when they will say, you know, I want to see something by, and they'll go to this book.
Yes.
And this is an enormous contribution you've made to Jewish life.
I hope so.
And it'll endure as long as people are reading. We just have to make sure people keep reading, Felix.
Yes.
Anyway, but that doesn't explain to me what you were trying to do here. Finish the thought.
What I was trying to do there is to create something easily readable as a belletristic, novel-like, charming book. Yes, you don't go to it for information. Here, you go for specific information. Yes, so from that point of view, it's hugely important, clearly.
Yes.
Here, you go for artistry. To tie the thing
Yes,
together.
and you could read this at night. You
And
wouldn't
you
have
could
to
read
this
that
at
at
night.
night.
That's
Very
right.
easily.
That's right.
Yeah.
Can't read that one in bed.
Well, kol hakavod to you, and you know, may you only go from strength to strength, Felix. Again, kol tuv v'hatzlacha to you, all goodness and success to all three of you. You have brought something to the world, you know. It's very moving to talk to people who have made this kind of contribution, all three of you. And again, it's a joy to meet you for the first time.
It's a joy to meet you, Mark.
I hope we
It's a
get to see
pleasure.
each other
By the way, there are
often.
many,
And
many
Babakasha.
more. You know, there's just three of us sitting here at the table.
Well, I expect
But-
each time you have another
Yeah.
volume, you'll come back and we'll do it again.
I mean, there's a total of 120 plus
People involved.
It's,
Yes.
it's a huge effort.
By the way, it is not only a huge book, it's a heavy book.
It's a heavy book.
It's a monumental effort.
Yes.
So everybody should stay healthy and strong. You just
I
keep
agree.
just keep churning them out. Again, I have watched you from afar. It's lovely to be able to meet with you
Same
in person,
here.
and you've
Same
done
here.
extraordinary work. And you should be on Shalom TV all the time. by the way.
Well,
you really should. We
thank you.
should talk
Okay.
about that. You
Yeah.
know?
invite me
And
back.
Felix, I hope this is just the beginning of a relationship we have with each
My
other.
pleasure.
And again, all the best to you. Thank you very,
And to
very
you.
much.
Thank you for doing this.
The title of Volume 10 is Jewish Culture and Civilization from 1973 to 2005. It is the first in a 10-volume set that Felix Posen and the Posen Library is helping to produce with James's help, and Deborah and Nurith did the first volume, which is the last of the sequence, but it's the first, and I'm thrilled because it is in some way the one that touches us the most, that it's most current. So I recommend it to all of you, and I hope that you either see it, or again, if you're able to, you make it part of your own home library. As always, I invite you to be in touch with me with any thoughts or comments you may have to any of the ideas you heard expressed at this table, and how would you define Jewish culture? Please email me, write me, post on our Facebook wall, tweet me. I look forward to hearing from you. And if you want to be in touch with Felix Posen or any of these guests, just email me and I will forward your email on to them. Until the next time, I'm Mark Golub. L'chaim, my friends, to life.
We would be pleased to send a complimentary DVD of this program to anyone who wishes to support Shalom TV with a tax-deductible gift of $36, double chai or more, to the nonprofit organization Jewish Education in Media. Simply visit the Shalom TV website homepage and click on the Donate button to make a donation by PayPal or your credit card. And please indicate the program for which you would like a DVD. Or you can send your tax-deductible check made out to GEM, Post Office Box 180, Riverdale Station, Bronx, New York 10471. And again, please remember to indicate which program you would like to receive on DVD with our compliments. And we thank you for your kind support.
L'chaim is a presentation of Jewish Education in Media.